I was invited today to share my story of the power of food in my life. But really, it's much bigger than that. It's about my relationship with the land, as that's where food comes from. It's not just about what food has given me, but what I can give back to the land to foster reciprocity. I recall, as a young child, fondly listening to stories from my mom and my aunties about the times they would harvest food and medicines from the land back home on the East Coast. I was very fortunate that my relationship with the land was nurtured from a very young age, and one of those ways was through the power of stories. But that relationship shifted as I aged into a teen, as we all know, and my priorities changed. In my early 20s, I began working in the mental health sector. After many years, probably almost 20, working in that field, I decided to make a change as I noticed something was missing in my work. I desired to work in a more healing and holistic environment, but I wasn't experiencing that as working as a crisis worker. Food was never prioritized as a form of healing. So for years, I worked on organic farms and homesteads. I studied holistic nutrition. I reclaimed ancestral knowledge of being in relationship with the land. I even changed my diet to eliminate chronic symptoms I had been experiencing for years. Sometime later, I began working with a food security organization. I was working to develop workshops for students around growing, cooking, and composting. I thought I found what I was looking for. People in food security were passionate about organic growing, passionate about sustainability, passionate about minimizing environmental impacts and also minimizing food waste. But I noticed still, and this was all great, but I noticed still there was something missing. I witnessed time and again people pulling out the plants determined as weeds. I noticed people complaining about the squirrels who bit into the tomatoes. I noticed people complaining about the infestation of mites on the leafy greens. All reasons to be a disgruntled grower, of course. But I wondered what could I do to open the door for people to deepen their relationship with the land, to not just see the land as access to land to grow food, but see land as a way to deepen and reconnect to the land and all of the beings. I wondered, is it possible to shift people's perspectives of the so-called weeds and pests? You know, I don't think there are any squirrels out there that are conspiring to take down your best tomatoes in your garden. I don't think so. But I understand the disappointment when we're eagerly harvesting, only to discover that the biggest and ripest tomatoes have been taste tested by our furry neighbors. So I began bringing the practice of gratitude into the student gardening and cooking workshops. Holding appreciation for all beings is an ancient practice of all of our ancestors. Whether someone is religious or not religious, the practice of gratitude is universal. My Mi'kmaq ancestors would sing songs and lay tobacco whenever planting and harvesting. So in the workshops, whenever we ate food, we took the time to think of all those beings connected to that food. We mentioned the farmers and the pollinators, the microorganisms, our families and friends who shared food with us. We mentioned those who transported our food, the elements, and others we may have forgotten to mention. I recall asking the students if they think we should be thankful for the mosquitoes. Oh no, when I asked that question, kids said, no! And I asked why. And of course, the common responses were, they bite us, they carry diseases. So I began to ask questions to see if students could at least appreciate and respect the mosquito in the web of life. I asked, who eats mosquito? Birds, frogs, dragonflies were just a few that were named. I asked, what would happen if all the mosquitoes disappeared? Who would the frogs and others eat? Who would pollinate the tiniest flowers? Time and again, students came to the conclusion that mosquito was important, even if we didn't like them biting us. Then I brought gratitude to the garden. I spoke of the plants as beings to respect and appreciate. I invited students to say thank you whenever they were harvesting, in whatever way that felt comfortable for them. Some of them kind of whispered it, some of them gave them kisses. I remember one time working in the garden, and I heard someone say, "Hey, did you say thanks?" And I turned around and I saw two boys, one holding a handful of string beans. And the boy said, "Yeah, I said thanks." So a few minutes later, I went up to that boy who asked the question, and I asked him, "Hey, I noticed you asked so-and-so," I can't remember his name now, but I asked him, I noticed you asked him, if he said thanks. And he said to me, "Carolynne, it's the first thing you taught us." So when we think about that, if children are taught the importance of maintaining a respectful and appreciative relationship with the land and all beings, then maybe there's a chance that they will become protectors of the land in the future. My next step was to change the attitudes of the weeds in the garden. I noticed purslane, lamb's quarters, and stinging nettle popping up in the work garden to my delight. But I also noticed these plants were being pulled and composted. So I decided to create a protected area, to create a teaching weed garden. This would be an opportunity to share knowledge of these plants with the students and with my colleagues. At first, it wasn't well received. There were concerns about the weed spreading, that it wouldn't look aesthetically pleasing. So I began making green smoothies, I made dandelion fritters, I made nettle chips, I made teas, all for my colleagues. I taught students about being cautious of stinging nettle, but with respect, sharing stories of poison ivy and stinging nettle as being protectors of the land. If you're curious to know that story, I invite you to ask me later. Over a short period of time, attitudes shifted and people became more curious about the teaching weed garden. It was even included as part of our location site tour. It's important to think of how we reference the land and the beings with our language. Does it connect us or separate us? Do the words weeds and pests support that connection? How will these words influence the younger generations? All beings play a role in the web of life. Some people have forgotten those roles. How can we respect all of the plants? Maybe instead of tossing the so-called weeds into the compost, maybe creating a meal or medicine with them. Or maybe learning about their intentional role in their native homeland. Maybe handling them with as much care as we do with the tomatoes and the cucumbers when we are removing them, but also giving thanks. Maybe it's about taking time to sit in the garden and notice with all of our senses who is connected to that place. Maybe through that experience, a deeper appreciation and respect can grow for those furry and feathery beings that visit our garden. All of our ancestors at one time knew that food was medicine. They knew that it was important to be in good relationship with the land, with all of the beings. They knew that the plants and beings could be our healers and our teachers. They knew that gratitude was important because when appreciation is lost, then so is respect. That is when people will no longer think of how their actions will impact all of the beings. We see that evident today. Taking the time to hold gratitude for all of those connected to our food and water is important. I had the opportunity to travel to the James Bay area for work as the Indigenous Food Access Manager to support the distribution of affordable fresh vegetables and fruits in the northern communities. Shopping at the northern store during my travels was challenging. The high cost of food and the lack of access to healthy foods was disheartening. Yet the people in the community are resilient and are building ways to reclaim food sovereignty. After my trip to the north, I went to a grocery store and I began to cry. I was overwhelmed with grief and appreciation. I was able to afford healthier foods once again, realizing I am living a life of privilege. The cost of food in the North is at least 3 times higher than it is in the South. I will always be thankful for having food and clean drinking water. I give thanks every day. So if you care about the food and the water and the next generations ahead, then I invite you to take the time to deepen your relationship with the land, with all of the beings. Fostering a reciprocal relationship through gratitude, respectful language, and time spent connecting to all of the beings will bring us back home to that relationship. When we deepen our relationship with the land, it supports our relationship with ourselves, and it strengthens our relationships with each other. Wilalio, Miigwech, thank you for your time and for the opportunity to share my story.